So Dan, continuing on our discussion, how well do you have to understand the actual technology, or are you provided with everything you need to know to best market the products?
Um, I mean, that's part of the job, right? Is to, so I would say there's two ways when you say technology, there's two ways I would think about that. One is understanding how the product works, right? So the biotechnology that's associated with it, and or the pharmaceutical technology is associated with it. That's really critical to understanding the mechanism of action, and that also becomes important when we think about, you know, the patenting of the product and the branding of the product. That's all critically important. From a marketing point of view, I think what you're referring to though is the technology of, a customer relationship marketing database or CRM. I have a general basic understanding, right? So I liken it this way. I know what I can do with my iPhone. I don't know how to put an iPhone together, right?
Right.
And I don't need to know how to put it together because there's
Mhm.
other people who are experts around it, but I do know how to use it effectively. It's a tool in the box that I can utilize. That's kind of how I think about so like a CRM. I don't know there are many people who are far more knowledgeable than I am on it, but I know that we need it for certain things in order to be able to engage with our customers and more importantly measure that engagement. How are we doing? I mean, that's the kind of the key with marketing is you have a hypothesis, you put it out there, you develop a strategy around it, you essentially test that by putting it into market, and then you get feedback from the market. Is your hypothesis right or wrong? And you can then modify it and tweak it and make it more efficient over time. Or you can say, wow, we were way off. Like, using Nova as the example, we were way off and we need to change altogether our strategy or go in a completely different direction.
Are you talking to the researchers at all?
Yes, frequently, very frequently.
Um,
So we have a very close. So we are a promotional arm of a very large organization, the Tal Pharmaco, multinational company. They have their own research group, and we go there. They come here quite frequently. We have a lot of different discussions. That's why the virtual world is really great now. We can just get on a call. It's a little bit easier for everyone, right? It's not a week out of your life. It's just an hour or two. Makes our lives much easier.
yeah, well, sounds like you get to deal with the technology and the marketing. Sounds pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And then with respect to branding, I assume you're talking about some trademarks. Are you
Sure.
registering a lot of marks? Are you registering the same marks in many countries? Are you doing searches in all
Yep.
these countries? I know with respect to at least the automakers, there's, and maybe you're not in quite as many countries, but if they're filing in 180 countries, they have to make sure.
Yeah.
I remember Esso changed to Exxon, and because I think they had some issues
Yep.
with Esso, and then they had to rebrand totally. So why don't you explain a little bit about that process?
Sure. Yeah, so in this space, there are kind of two dominant companies that help with, the naming of a therapy, right? And what they'll do is they'll serve as a consultant to not only helping you to develop a name, right? Name that you may like, but then they'll also do the full search, not only for just the existence of that name anywhere else, but then usually what they'll do is they'll provide the resources that are required to the in-house legal team, who will then will have a naming and branding specialist who will do the full search globally to determine if we have any iconography that goes with the brand, any kind of look and feel. Has that been used anywhere else? Are we going to infringe on anybody else's kind of trademark materials? Are there is it being used, that color, look, and feel being used within the space you're entering in, right? So in my case, we're in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy space. So we look at all the other drugs in the space to determine what are they using for color, look, feel, and name, right? To make sure that we're not going to be too similar to anybody else. And then lastly, we would also then kind of look, globally of, okay, are there any sort of specifics in kind of other markets, other local brands that we don't use here in the US, but they may use in, say, Germany, that we would then be infringing upon or have too much of a similarity to that it would be effective for clear positioning around the brand. And then the last step, and this is kind of maybe not the last step, but this is one that I kind of had learned the hard way, is then you also need to look at the specific katakana characters, specifically in Japan, to make sure that however your brand name is translated, that those characters it gets translated into in Japanese actually make sense, that it actually is a word, or it's the word that you want it to be, getting back to the cultural considerations we touched on before.
I mean, do you generally file in all 90 countries, or do you pick and choose? And let's say you've got an issue in
Yeah.
one of them or two of them, do you just totally abort and move on, or,
Yeah.
without getting too much into,
Yeah. I
strategy?
mean, none of this is like too closely held, but typically if you're looking at a global brand, you would file generally in order. You'd file in the US first, then EU, because you get all 32 member states kind of in one fell swoop, and then you would file in Japan. And then from there, you would do kind of a filing sequence analysis. So each market looks at, there's reference pricing. So when you set your price, certain markets will reference other markets to determine what their price will be. So there is a whole kind of game theory around setting your price and which way you would want to or not want to. More as importantly, you would want to look at the size of the market. What does the reimbursement process look like? So, for example, Brazil is a giant market, but their reimbursement, the way their health insurance structure is set up is that about 25% of the population has commercial insurance, which will pay a more kind of like US type price. They will never be what the US pays, but it's a higher price, whereas 75% of the population has kind of the base insurance, which would never pay for most therapies. So you have to make a decision of, do we enter into that market? Depending upon the price of your product, you may choose not to enter into that market. But that's all kind of like determined by, how big is the market, how big is your population, what the price of your product is, whether you can make it work or not.
Is that all within your department, gauging all this stuff? I mean, like, wow, it's like a lot of information and
Yeah.
reimbursables and understanding how insurance works internationally.
So it kind of gets back to the concept around the iPhone. I don't need to know how to do it all, but I need to kind of know who to go to make those decisions. So in the US, less so, but at the global level, you absolutely need to kind of have some knowledge and facility in all those spaces.
All right, my last question, you've already been incredibly informative, and being a patents are near and dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get involved? I mean, I watch Jardians and those Ozempics and stuff, and the
Yeah.
music is wonderful,
Yeah.
and you see the technical
Yeah.
name and then the brand name, which doesn't seem any more easy for me to remember than
Yep.
that. But do you get involved at all with patents, or
Yeah.
because I don't hear them
Yeah.
on the commercials? They're not going to say U.S. patent
Yeah.
number 10 million blankety blank.
Yeah. So definitely in my current role to some degree, but much more so in my global role, my previous role. Um, and it happens in a lot of different ways, right? So as you can imagine, there are many, many different ways to seek patents around a therapy. So you can seek it around the process by which you develop and produce the active ingredient. You can develop a patent around how you're actually administering the therapy. I worked on a therapy that had a required prognostic test, which was also patented. So the process by which you would actually conduct that test was also patented, right? So you end up with our patent attorney used to use the term a canon of patents, right? A patent library, and they have the series of them. Some are as you know, are going to be much more defendable than others, and some are kind of like there's no downside to us patenting, as we might as well. It will provide a little bit of protection for us in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, I think virtually, I would be surprised if there's any pharmaceutical product on the market right now that has only a single patent. I would be willing to bet that they all have multiples, probably 5 at least. because it can be in the formulation, it can be in the administration, it could be in the how do you manufacture it, it can be in the how do you take it, right? Like literally, is there like some process by which you're consuming the product? So yeah, and that also then kind of we have to be thoughtful around what messages we're putting into the market, because if we're consistently saying something, like using the example of that prognostic test that I mentioned, if we are going out and saying, hey, everybody, anybody can have it, you can have it for free, well, that's going to kind of weaken our ability to leverage that as a defense. If someone comes and tries to infringe on it, they're going to say, well, you told anybody they can have it, so what's the difference? Right. So yes, they're very important. And from a, the marketing and messaging perspective, we need to be thoughtful about the things that we say and put into market, and what implications they could have for a patent.
Yeah, it was just a recent case, and I believe one of my interns was working on it, where the the company said that it was covered by a patent, or they said there was a patentable material, and it actually wasn't, and then they were sued on trademark issues for misleading trademark. I forget the exact issues. So.
Yeah,
Interrelationship there between the patents and the trademarks.
absolutely. Yeah, and we, like trademarks are for sure, that is something that is very common, a requirement, right?
Right.
For the brand name and any sort of look and feel materials. Yeah.
Well, that's all I have for now. Dan, do you have any parting comments, pearls of wisdom?
No, just thank you for having me on. This has been a great experience. Happy to answer any further questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you for all my viewers out there for another episode of Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein, and see you next time.